I used to think my toughest battles happened inside a courtroom, where I sat in a black robe listening to lawyers spar over land deeds and contracts. Turns out the fiercest case of my career started in my own backyard, with lace ribbons, champagne fountains, and one very determined woman named Rose Gibson. Rose wasn't just any neighbor. She was the president of our HOA, the self-appointed queen of clipboards and citations. One afternoon, she knocked on my door, all smiles and sweetness, asking to borrow my mansion for her niece's wedding. Against my better judgment, I said yes. One day I thought, what harm could it do? By the time the wedding bells stopped ringing, Rose wasn't playing the gracious guest anymore. She was strutting around as if she owned the place. And soon her true plan surfaced. She didn't just want a wedding venue, she wanted my entire mansion. Too bad for Rose, she picked the wrong man. Before we begin, drop a comment. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Isaac darling, Rose Gibson cooed, standing on my porch, with that too sweet smile that never reached her eyes. My niece is getting married, and your mansion? Well, it's just the perfect place for the ceremony. Just one day. We'll be in and out, you won't even notice. I raised an eyebrow. Rose, president of our HOA, wasn't known for subtlety. She ruled the neighborhood with her clipboard like it was a crown. Still, a wedding seemed harmless enough. Against my instincts, I agreed on the strict condition that it was only for the event. But here's the thing about Rose, she never wanted just one day. By the time the champagne dried and the last bouquet hit the floor, she was parading around my mansion like it had her name on the deed. And soon her real plan made itself clear. Rose wasn't borrowing my home. She was plotting to steal it. Too bad for her. She picked a judge. When you build something with your own two hands, or at least with every dime you've earned through decades of grinding in courtrooms, it takes on a life of its own. My mansion wasn't just a pile of bricks, columns, and antique chandeliers. It was my sanctuary. I had spent years restoring it, every detail polished, every room carrying a story. The marble staircase imported from Italy. The oak-paneled library filled with law books I actually read, not just for decoration. Even the backyard with its stone fountain had been designed after one I saw in Barcelona during a legal conference. To me, it was more than property, it was a monument to survival. I grew up in a cramped duplex, listening to neighbors fight through thin walls. I swore that if I ever clawed my way out, I'd have a place no one could take away. Or so I thought. But to Rose Gibson, my mansion was never mine at all. In her mind, it belonged to the community, or more specifically to her, since she was the self-crowned queen of the HOA. Rose had that uncanny ability to spin other people's achievements into insults against her. If I mowed my lawn twice a week, it was showing off. If I hosted a barbecue for friends, it was creating traffic in the neighborhood. If my lights sparkled at Christmas, it was blinding pilots. And the mansion, that was her ultimate sore spot. Rose had lived in the neighborhood for 15 years. She occupied a perfectly respectable colonial-style house at the cul-de-sac. To anyone else, it was a dream home. But in her eyes, my place loomed over hers like a palace overshadowing a cottage. She never said it directly, but the way she glanced at my wrought iron gates, the way she sniffed whenever delivery trucks came with packages, jealousy oozed from her like cheap perfume. Neighbors picked up on it too. Isaac, you know Rose doesn't like that your mansion's not part of the original HOA plan, right? One of them whispered to me at a block party. She's always saying it should have been written into the charter as community property. I laughed it off back then. I had the deed, the survey maps, and the legal firepower of a judge behind me. Rose's gossip was just noise, I thought. But noise has a way of turning into thunder when enough people repeat it. The HOA meetings became a circus. I'd show up occasionally thinking maybe we could hash out neighborly issues like potholes or speed bumps. Instead, I'd find Rose holding court like a monarch, wagging her pen at me. We need to discuss the disproportionate size of Isaac's property, she'd say. Or, it really should be assessed for community use, maybe a clubhouse, maybe a neighborhood museum. A museum. Can you imagine? My living room, where I read the morning paper, turned into a tourist attraction for Rose to parade her guests through. I bit my tongue more times than I can count. Judges are trained to listen before reacting, after all. But behind the calm smile, I was taking mental notes. Rose's obsession wasn't fading, it was growing, and the mansion was becoming more than just a building to her. It was a symbol of power she didn't have. Now here's where it gets interesting. Rose wasn't always the tyrant of the cul-de-sac. Rumor had it she once owned a much bigger house before a nasty lawsuit stripped it away. Some say it was her ex-husband who tricked her in the divorce. Others whispered about foreclosure. Whatever the truth, she never forgot the humiliation. I suspect when she looked at my mansion, she didn't just see marble and stone. She saw redemption, a second chance to own what life had stolen from her. And like any seasoned manipulator, she knew how to weave sympathy into control. At neighborhood socials, she'd tell teary stories of her lost home, casting herself as a tragic heroine. People ate it up. Soon they were nodding along when she said, "Isaac's mansion really belongs to all of us. It's the heart of the neighborhood. The heart, please. It was my heart, my sweat, my years, my savings." But by the time Rose came knocking about her niece's wedding, the narrative was already in motion. To some of the neighbors, she wasn't asking me for a favor. She was reclaiming what they believed had always been theirs. Looking back, I should have slammed the door that day. Told her no, absolutely not. Go rent a ballroom like everyone else. But I didn't. Maybe it was pity. Maybe I was tired of fighting her battles in whispers and side eyes. Or maybe deep down I underestimated just how far Rose Gibson was willing to go. Because envy is one thing, entitlement is another. But when you mix them together with a dash of bitterness, you don't just get jealousy, you get a plot. And while I was still clinking my glass at her niece's reception, Rose was already setting the stage for Act 2 of her drama, one in which the mansion didn't just host a wedding, it changed hands. Little did she know, I'd been through bigger heists than hers. In courtrooms, I'd seen billion-dollar fraudsters fall to pieces, because they thought no one was watching. Rose was about to learn the same lesson: never steal from a man who knows every trick in the legal playbook. The knock came on a Thursday afternoon, right when I'd settled into my leather chair with a glass of iced tea and a copy of the Federalist Papers light reading, at least for a judge like me. It wasn't just a knock, though. It was the kind of rapid, rehearsed tapping that screamed HOA business. And sure enough, when I opened the door, there stood Rose Gibson. "Isaac, darling," she began, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. "You look so relaxed. Must be nice to have the luxury of peace and quiet." Her eyes flicked past me into the grand foyer where the chandelier sparkled like 1,000 diamonds. She lingered on it a second too long before turning back to me with a smile I'd seen in courtrooms before, the kind con artists wear right before sliding forged checks across the table. I didn't say anything. Judges learn early on that silence makes people reveal themselves. Finally, Rose cleared her throat and clasped her hands together in mock humility. "My niece, sweet girl, bless her heart, is getting married next month. But the poor thing, she doesn't have the budget for a real venue." And then it hit me. Your mansion, the gardens, the fountain, that grand staircase. "Isaac, it's perfect." I almost laughed. She was asking me to turn my home, my sanctuary, into a rental hall. I pictured strangers tramping across the Persian rugs, champagne flutes, sweating rings onto antique tables, toddlers sticky with cake, smearing frosting onto my leather couches. My instinct was to say no, firmly. But Rose wasn't finished. It would only be for one day, she insisted, already stepping closer, as if proximity would soften me. One day, and it would mean the world to her, and to the community. Imagine how proud everyone will feel seeing our HOA represented in such a glamorous light. Why people will be talking about this for years. There it was, the shift from favor for a niece to favor for the HOA. Rose never did anything without looping her little fiefdom into it. If she could tie her request to the community, it suddenly became less of a plea and more of a civic duty. I folded my arms. "Rose, it's not a venue. It's my home." She tilted her head, eyes narrowing just enough to show a crack in the sweetness. Of course. I would never dream of intruding. But surely you wouldn't deny a young bride her special day, would you? Think of the photos, the memories. The mansion would be in every picture. People would see it as the jewel of the neighborhood. Your name would be spoken with such admiration. Flattery. Another courtroom trick. When cornered, some lawyers would try to butter me up. "Your Honor, with your wisdom, surely you see the merit in our case." I always recognized it for what it was: desperation. Still, I hesitated. Not because I believed her words, but because part of me wondered if agreeing just this once would finally buy me some peace. Maybe if I gave her the wedding, she'd stop circling the mansion like a vulture. Maybe she'd move on to harassing someone else about mailbox heights or lawn ornaments. Just one day, I asked carefully. Her smile widened too wide. "Just one glorious, unforgettable day. We'll be respectful, I promise. No damage, no intrusion. You won't even notice we were here." That was the first lie. I considered my options. If I said no, I'd become the villain of the neighborhood overnight. Rose would spin the story, paint me as the heartless judge who denied true love its fairy tale. If I said yes, at least I could set boundaries and watch her closely. "All right," I said, finally pointing a finger at her. "One day. Strictly the wedding. You clean up afterward. No HOA meetings, no community events, no funny business." Clear. She nodded so quickly, I wondered if she'd rehearsed it in the mirror. Crystal clear, Isaac. You have my word. Funny thing about words, they're only as strong as the person speaking them. And Rose Gibson's word was worth less than counterfeit money. When she left, I watched her walk down the driveway, her heels clicking like gavel strikes on marble. She didn't look like a woman grateful for a favor. She looked like a general who'd just won a battle without firing a shot. That night, as I sat in the library, I replayed the conversation in my head. Something gnawed at me. She'd mentioned her niece only once in passing. No names, no fiancé, no details about the ceremony. The rest of her pitch had been about the mansion, about the community, about how everyone would see the house. It wasn't about a wedding, it was about possession. And yet, against my better judgment, I'd opened the door. I'd given her a foothold. One day, I told myself. One harmless day. But if there's one thing I've learned in both law and life, it's this. The moment you give an inch to someone like Rose Gibson, they start measuring miles. Little did I know, by saying yes, I hadn't agreed to host a wedding. I'd unknowingly written the opening line of a legal thriller, one where I wasn't just the judge. I was also the victim. The morning of the wedding dawned far too early. I woke up to the sound of trucks in my driveway, trucks I hadn't authorized. When I peered out the window, I saw a parade of vendors unloading crates of flowers, crates of champagne, and what looked suspiciously like a stage. A stage. In my backyard. I dressed quickly, went outside, and caught the first whiff of what Rose Gibson's definition of a simple ceremony really meant. There were men stringing lights across my fountain, women setting up a red carpet that stretched from the driveway to the front door, and someone, God help me, was stapling tulle to the marble columns of my porch. Whoa, 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 I shouted. This isn't part of the deal. One of the workers shrugged. Ma'am said it was all approved. Ma'am, that told me everything. Moments later, Rose herself appeared, dressed head to toe in an elegant ivory pantsuit that could have been mistaken for a bridal gown if you didn't look too closely. She waved her clipboard like a conductor's baton. Isaac, isn't it magnificent? Don't worry, we'll take it all down after. You won't even notice. Rose, I growled, this looks like the Grammys, not a wedding. You said small. Family only. She tilted her head, flashing that syrupy smile. Well, you know how weddings grow. Besides, the community deserved a little sparkle. It reflects so well on the HOA to be associated with such elegance. You'll thank me when you see the press coverage. Press coverage. That's when I noticed the banners. White satin with gold lettering, presented by the Willow Creek HOA. My mansion had officially been branded like a sponsor for Rose's personal vanity project. The guests started to arrive, one luxury car after another, until the driveway looked like a dealership. None of them seemed like family. There were business associates, county officials, even a few real estate developers. I overheard one say, "So this is the estate she told us about, impressive estate, told us about." My jaw clenched. I lingered on the edge of the crowd, watching as Rose glided from guest to guest. She wasn't introducing herself as president of the HOA. No, she was introducing herself as the lady of the house. My house? At one point I caught her raising a champagne flute and declaring, "Isn't it wonderful to finally open our mansion to the people who matter most?" The crowd applauded. I nearly choked. Her so-called niece, the bride, barely registered. The poor girl looked like an accessory in Rose's performance, a mannequin in lace shoved to the side while Rose soaked up the spotlight. I couldn't even tell who the groom was until halfway through, when a nervous young man shuffled forward like he'd wandered onto the wrong stage. It wasn't a wedding. It was a coronation. The ceremony itself was chaos. Rose walked down the aisle before the bride, as though she were the star. She gave a speech longer than the vows. And when the officiant pronounced the couple husband and wife, Rose actually threw her arms wide and declared, "And welcome to the future of Willow Creek." I stood there dumbfounded, trying not to laugh out loud. I'd seen defendants perjure themselves on the stand with more dignity. But the real kicker came at the reception. Tables groaned under buffets of lobster champagne flowed like a river, and Rose circulated with the confidence of a monarch. Every time someone complimented the mansion, she nodded graciously as though she'd paid for every brick. "Oh yes, the library will make a fine boardroom," I overheard her telling a local developer. "Plenty of space for negotiations. Boardroom." Another guest asked how long she'd lived here. She didn't even flinch. "Long enough to know this property belongs in the right hands." Then with a glance in my direction, "And soon it will be." That was the moment I realized this wasn't delusion, it was strategy. Rose was planting seeds, subtle suggestions that she already owned the mansion, so that when she made her move, people would believe her. By sundown, I was seething. The lawn was trampled, the fountain clogged with rose petals, and my once pristine dining hall reeked of spilled wine. The last guest staggered out as dusk settled, leaving behind a battlefield of broken glasses and confetti. I expected Rose to thank me, maybe feign gratitude before retreating. Instead, she stood in the foyer like a queen, surveying her castle. Lovely, wasn't it? She sighed. And this is only the beginning. The beginning, I asked sharply. She gave me a look I'll never forget, calm, assured, dangerous. You'll see. The mansion fits so well with the HOA's vision. You really should be proud, Isaac. We finally found its true purpose. I realized then that Rose Gibson hadn't borrowed my mansion for a wedding. She'd staged a dress rehearsal for a takeover. And while the last champagne glass was still clinking in the sink, her real performance was only just beginning. I expected at the very least to wake up the morning after the wedding to silence and an empty lawn. That was the deal, wasn't it? One day Rose Gibson had promised in and out you won't even notice. Instead, I woke up to the sound of hammering. I stumbled to the window in my robe, coffee in hand, only to see men reattaching garlands, straightening banners, and dragging chairs back onto my grass. My fountain, already abused by petals and champagne corks, was now hosting a floral archway twice as large as the one from the wedding. I marched outside, voice booming. What on earth are you people doing? A young worker barely out of high school looked up sheepishly. Miss Gibson said, We're setting up for the HOA social, at my house. Before I could respond, Rose appeared, perfectly coiffed, clipboard in hand. Isaac, she said as though I were the surprise guest at her own party. You're up early. Isn't it exciting? The neighborhood loved the wedding so much that I thought, why stop there? This mansion is simply too perfect to waste on one event. Waste, I sputtered. This is my home, Rose. She chuckled softly, like I'd just told a child's joke. Of course. But don't you see? The house belongs to more than just you now. It's become a symbol. The HOA needs a proper headquarters, and what better place than here, headquarters? That word settled in my stomach like a stone. I reminded her of the deal, my conditions, my explicit one day only. Rose waved a manicured hand as though swatting at a fly. Oh, don't be dramatic, Isaac. Everyone agrees this is the natural evolution of things. The community deserves access. We've already started planning meetings, charity galas, maybe even a summer camp for the children. Just imagine how noble your legacy will be. Legacy. That was her angle, turning my mansion into a public monument as though my name would be etched into some plaque while she held the keys. I demanded she take down the decorations immediately. She smirked, tapped her clipboard and said, You may want to check the paperwork before making demands. Paperwork. That evening, she slipped a packet into my mailbox. It looked official, stamped, signed, notarized. According to her documents, the mansion was built on land that once belonged to a community trust tied to the neighborhood's founding charter. She claimed the property had been misfiled as private ownership decades ago, and that thanks to the HOA's diligence, it was finally being restored to its rightful status as community property. I laughed when I read it. A belly laugh. I'd seen better forgeries from first-year law students trying to fake parking permits. The signatures were shaky, the dates didn't line up, and the notary stamp expired 5 years ago. But here's the problem. Most neighbors wouldn't know the difference. To them, the paperwork looked official enough, and Rose knew it. Within a week, rumors swirled. At the grocery store, someone whispered, Did you hear? The mansion is actually HOA property. At the gas station, another neighbor muttered, Guess Isaac's been squatting all these years, squatting in my own home. I tried to confront Rose at an HOA board meeting. She stood at the podium like a conquering queen and declared, As of now, the Willow Creek Mansion is officially under the guardianship of the HOA. We thank Judge Hayes for his temporary custodianship. But it's time the property served the greater good. Applause broke out. Actual applause. I slammed my hand on the table. This is fraud, I thundered. Outright fraud, Rose didn't even flinch. She looked me dead in the eye and said, Isaac, if you truly believe that, then you know what to do. File a complaint. Take it to court. But until then, the community stands with me. That's when it clicked. She was daring me of all people to drag her into court, because she thought the optics would ruin me. Imagine the headline, Judge sues neighbors over mansion ownership. She wanted to paint me as a greedy old man clinging to property that wasn't mine. But Rose had underestimated one thing. I wasn't just a judge. I was a patient hunter. Instead of shouting louder, I began to gather quietly. I photographed her banners, recorded her speeches, collected testimonies from vendors she stiffed on payment. I even found a caterer who admitted Rose claimed she was the owner when signing the contract. Piece by piece, I built a case not for small claims court, but for something far larger. The final straw came 2 weeks later when I caught her giving a tour of my library to a group of real estate investors. I listened from the hallway as she described where the conference table would go, how the upstairs suites could be repurposed into executive offices. That wasn't ambition. That was theft in progress. When the investors left, I confronted her. She didn't deny it. She just smiled that same cold smile and said, "Face it, Isaac. This place is wasted on one man. Soon everyone will see that." She was right about one thing soon everyone would see. Just not in the way she imagined. Because Rose Gibson wasn't the first person to wave fake documents in front of a judge. And in my courtroom, lies don't last long. If there's one thing I've learned about human nature, it's this: people don't need truth, they just need a story that feels true. And Rose Gibson was a master storyteller. Within days of her paperwork revelation, the neighborhood split like dry timber under an axe. At the coffee shop down the road, I overheard two neighbors whispering. "Isaac's been squatting all these years," one said. "Imagine all that wealth, and it wasn't even his to begin with." Another chimed in, "Rose is finally bringing justice. About time that Manchin served the people, not just his ego. My ego, I wanted to march over and shove the deed in their faces. Instead, I sipped my coffee and walked out, letting their words sink like nails into the back of my skull. At the next HOA meeting, the division was impossible to ignore. Half the room sat, stiff arms crossed, looking ashamed whenever our eyes met. The other half clapped at every word Rose uttered, like she was running for office. Rose had staged the meeting in my backyard, under strings of lights still dangling from her so-called wedding. Chairs lined the lawn, a microphone squealed in the breeze, and there she stood in her signature pantsuit basking in the glow of borrowed grandeur. "Neighbors," she declared, clipboard in hand, "we have an opportunity to restore balance. For too long, one man has hoarded what should be a shared treasure. Isaac Hayes has lived in this mansion as though it were his castle. But castles don't belong in neighborhoods, they belong to the people." Applause, cheers, even a whistle. I rose from my seat slowly, deliberately letting the silence spread before I spoke. "This is my property, my deed, my name on every record. Don't let Rose's fantasies blind you to reality." A woman in the second row shook her head. "But she showed us documents." "Documents she forged," I said flatly. "Sloppy ones too, and expired notary seal dates that don't align signatures that don't exist in county records. I could dismantle it in 5 minutes in court." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. But Rose raised her hand, silencing them with a queenly gesture. "See how defensive he is. If Isaac truly had nothing to hide, he wouldn't need to threaten us with lawsuits." It wasn't just the words, it was how she said them. Calm, smug, dripping with false dignity. She wasn't arguing law. She was working the court of public opinion, and unfortunately that court doesn't require evidence, just charisma. That night, as I walked back into the mansion, a group of neighbors stood on the sidewalk, glaring at me like I was an intruder. One of them muttered, "Enjoy it while it lasts." The air was changing. Even the children picked sides. On Saturday, as I trimmed the hedges, 2 boys rode past on bikes. "That's not your house," one shouted, while the other rang his bell in agreement. They laughed as they sped off. Kids don't invent things like that, they repeat what they hear at dinner tables. But not everyone bowed to Rose. A few still had sense. Mrs. Alvarez, who lived across the street, came over one evening with a casserole. "Judge Hayes," she whispered, "don't let that woman bully you. We know this is your home. She's just convincing the gullible ones." I thanked her, though her words felt like a thin bandage on a bullet wound. Then there was Tom, a gruff Vietnam vet with a yard full of rusted car parts. He cornered me at the mailbox. "Don't you worry, Judge. If she thinks she can take this house, she'll have to go through me first." He tapped the side of his truck where a shotgun rack gleamed in the morning Sunday. Reassuring, maybe. Legal, not even close. But I appreciated the loyalty. Still, the balance was tipping against me. Rose threw block parties at the mansion without asking, complete with bounce houses and food trucks. She handed out flyers claiming the mansion would soon be the Willow Creek Community Center. She even posed for photos on my staircase, posting them online with captions like, "Excited to open our doors to the neighborhood soon." Her campaign was brilliant in its simplicity. Claim it loudly, claim it often, and people will believe it. One evening, as I grilled a steak on the patio, I noticed 3 couples strolling the grounds, pointing at my hedges as though shopping for furniture. Rose was leading them, of course, describing the event space potential. That was the breaking point. I set down my tongs, stormed across the yard, and cut her off mid-sentence. "Get out, all of you. This isn't a showroom, it's my home." One of the couples looked offended. But Rose said, I raised my voice, steel cutting through the night. I don't care what Rose said. This is private property. You are trespassing." Rose didn't flinch. She smiled that cold smile and whispered just loud enough for everyone to hear. "See how hostile he is. This is why the community needs to intervene." The couple's left murmuring eyes darting between us. Neighbors were dividing into two camps, the faithful who still believed in law, and the gullible who worshipped Rose's fantasy. And in between the fence-sitters who would tip whichever way the wind blew strongest. But I knew something Rose didn't. She thought she was orchestrating a takeover with charm and forged documents. She had no idea I was building a case meticulously quietly, with the patience of a judge who'd watched empires crumble on technicalities. She had split the neighborhood, yes, but soon she'd learn there's one place where applause doesn't matter, whispers carry no weight, and lies collapse under their own arrogance. The courtroom. The best way to beat someone like Rose Gibson is to let them think they're winning. People like her crave attention, applause, and the illusion of power. Take those away too early, and they just grow louder, more desperate. But let them bask in their own arrogance. They'll build the gallows with their own hands. So while Rose strutted around my mansion like it was already deeded to the HOA, I played the part of the weary neighbor too tired to fight. I smiled at her snide comments. I nodded when she paraded investors through my library. I let her think I was broken, but behind the calm exterior, I was working, quietly, patiently, methodically. The first step was evidence. I started carrying a small voice recorder in my pocket. Rose loved to talk, and she was careless with her words. At a block party, she threw again on my lawn. She clinked her glass and declared, "Our mansion will soon be the pride of Willow Creek. Isaac's just a placeholder. Placeholder." Her words, not mine. And now on tape. Next came photographs. I documented every HOA banner stapled to my gates, every flyer claiming the mansion was under community management, every unauthorized meeting she held in my dining room. I even snapped pictures of her unlocking my wine cellar one afternoon to impress her guests. She didn't notice. She was too busy bragging about our vintage. Then came witnesses. Vendors, neighbors, even a few disillusioned HOA members who realized Rose's promises didn't match reality. One caterer admitted Rose signed contracts under the name owner of Willow Creek Mansion. A florist showed me checks that bounced after the wedding. Slowly, the list of people she'd burned began to grow, but the real bombshell dropped when I dug deeper into her financials. As a judge, I knew where to look, which records were public, and which strings to pull quietly. That's when I discovered Rose hadn't just been bluffing about investors. She'd actually secured a short-term loan using forged documents that claimed the mansion as collateral. That wasn't just arrogance. That was fraud on a federal level. I'll admit, when I saw the paperwork, my hands shook. She wasn't just playing neighborhood queen anymore, she was risking prison time. She'd crossed from petty HOA nonsense into a full-blown criminal enterprise. And yet she strutted around unbothered hosting planning sessions for how the mansion would be divided up, offices upstairs, ballroom downstairs, my study converted into archives. I listened quietly, jotting notes, smiling when she winked at me as if to say, "See, you can't stop me." Oh, but I could. The hardest part was keeping my composure. Every instinct screamed at me to throw the deed on the table and crush her lies in front of everyone. But I knew the timing had to be perfect. Expose her too early and she'd spin it, accuse me of intimidation, maybe even play the victim. No, I needed her lies to pile so high they collapsed under their own weight. In the meantime, the neighborhood grew more divided. Some whispered apologies in private. "We don't believe her, Isaac, we know it's yours." Others avoided me entirely, crossing the street like I was contagious. And then there were the zealots, her loyalists, who parroted every word she said. One evening, as I trimmed hedges, Mr. Larkin, a man who once borrowed my lawnmower for 3 months, marched up and said, "You should just hand over the mansion, Isaac. It's selfish to hog it. Rose has a vision." I nearly laughed in his face. A vision. Sure, a vision of herself on a throne. I held back, though, and simply replied, "Careful, Larkin. You might be testifying about that vision under oath soon." He blinked, confused, then scurried away. Rose mistook my restraint for weakness. She grew bolder, louder, more reckless. She even scheduled a grand opening for the so-called Willow Creek Community Center flyers invitations, even a ribbon-cutting ceremony. The date 2 weeks away. Perfect. Because by then, my case file was nearly complete. Audio recordings, photos, sworn statements, financial records, forged loan documents, and even an email chain where Rose bragged to her investors that she'd soon have full control of the mansion. I stored it all in a neat binder labeled and cross-referenced like any judge preparing for trial. And make no mistake, this would be a trial, just not the kind Rose expected. The night before her grand opening, I stood in my study binder in hand, looking out at the mansion she thought she'd stolen. I almost pitied her. Almost. Because what she didn't know was that every smirk, every lie, every forged document had been a gift to me. She'd handed me the rope, and tomorrow, in front of her adoring crowd, I'd let her hang herself with it. She thought she was about to unveil her triumph. Instead, she was about to walk straight into the biggest legal ambush of her life. And this time, the gavel wouldn't just fall in court, it would fall in her own backyard. The morning of Rose Gibson's so-called grand opening arrived like the premiere of a Broadway play. Except instead of a theater, it was my mansion. Instead of actors, it was neighbors, investors, and HOA loyalists. And instead of a standing ovation, well, Rose was about to get a verdict. I watched from the upstairs balcony as cars lined the street. Balloons bobbed on my front gates. A giant banner stretched across the porch. "Welcome to the Willow Creek Community Center, Community Center." My jaw clenched. Rose had spared no expense, well, no expense of her own, since most of it was borrowed on fraudulent loans. A catering truck parked in the driveway, photographers roamed the grounds, and a red ribbon fluttered in the morning breeze. At the center of it all stood Rose herself, draped in a crimson suit that screamed dictator chic, waving at guests like royalty. "Isaac," she called, as I descended the stairs, "glad you could join us. You'll be remembered as the generous man who handed over his home for the greater good." I smiled faintly. "Oh, I'll be remembered all right." Neighbors buzzed with excitement. "It's finally happening," one whispered. "We have a clubhouse," another muttered. "Rose saved the community." Saved. The irony nearly choked me. The ceremony began with speeches. Rose held court at the microphone, painting herself as a visionary. "This mansion was never meant to belong to one man," she declared. "It is and always has been the heart of Willow Creek. Today we reclaim what is rightfully ours." Cheers erupted. Cameras flashed. Investors nodded approvingly. I let her bask in it. Let her enjoy her peak, because the higher you climb, the harder the fall. When she raised the ceremonial scissors for the ribbon cutting, I stepped forward, calm, measured, binder tucked under my arm. "Before you cut that ribbon, Rose," I said, my voice carrying over the microphone, "perhaps we should clear up a few legal matters." The crowd hushed. Rose's smile faltered. "Legal matters? Oh, Isaac, don't be petty. This is a celebration." "No," I replied evenly, "this is fraud." Gasps rippled through the crowd. I set the binder on the podium, opened it with deliberate care, and pulled out the first exhibit, a photo of Rose in my wine cellar, glass raised. Exhibit A, Miss Gibson introducing herself to caterers as the owner of this property. Rose scoffed, but her eyes flickered nervously. Next, I played an audio recording on a small speaker. Rose's voice echoed across the lawn. "Our mansion will soon be the pride of Willow Creek. Isaac's just a placeholder." Murmurs erupted. Neighbors glanced at one another, doubt creeping into their faces. Exhibit C. I continued flipping to a set of documents. Forged paperwork submitted to county records, notarized with a stamp that expired in 2018. I held it up so everyone could see the faded seal. "For the record, presenting falsified documents to obtain property is a felony." Rose's smile cracked. "This is outrageous. He's twisting things," but I wasn't finished. I pulled the trump card copies of the fraudulent loan she'd taken, using my mansion as collateral, and Exhibit D, Rose Gibson's crowning achievement. She didn't just lie to you neighbors. She lied to investors, banks, and the state of California. She claimed ownership of this property to secure funding. That isn't just deceit, that's wire fraud. The investors shifted uneasily. One pulled out his phone, scrolling furiously. Another muttered, "She said she owned it." Rose's face drained of color. That's taken out of context." Out of context, I cut in, my voice sharp. "Would you like me to read the email you sent to your backers? The one where you bragged, 'Soon the mansion will be mine and Hayes won't even see it coming'?" Silence. For once, Rose Gibson had no words. I took a deep breath, then delivered the final blow. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my judicial ID, holding it up for all to see. Gasps echoed through the lawn as I announced, "My name is Judge Isaac Hayes. And you, Rose Gibson, are guilty of attempted property theft, fraud, forgery, and criminal trespass." The crowd erupted, not with cheers this time, but with chaos. Neighbors whispered furiously. The investors backed away like rats abandoning a sinking ship. And Rose, she froze, scissors, still in hand, trembling. Judge, one man stammered. "You're a judge." "Yes," I said calmly, "and I've been letting Rose dig her own grave while I gathered every piece of evidence." Today she stands exposed, not as a leader, not as a savior, but as a con artist. Rose snapped, then dropping the scissors, her voice shrill. You can't do this to me. This house was supposed to be mine. It was always mine. Her outburst sealed her fate. The illusion shattered. Loyalists who had clapped minutes earlier now recoiled in disgust. Even her most faithful allies muttered, "She lied to us." I closed the binder, straightened my jacket, and spoke with finality. This mansion isn't a community center. It isn't a clubhouse. It isn't Rose Gibson's stage. It's my home. And the law, something Rose clearly underestimated, says so. The red ribbon fluttered in the wind uncut. And as police sirens wailed faintly in the distance, thanks to a little call I'd placed earlier, Rose Gibson realized her grand opening had just become her curtain call. The moment the police cruisers turned onto Willow Creek Drive, the crowd shifted like a tide. Neighbors who minutes earlier had clapped for Rose's every word now stepped back from her whispering, pointing their loyalty dissolving under the weight of sirens. Rose froze at the podium, red suit blazing under the afternoon sunday. She tried to hold her smile, but it faltered. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. "Isaac," she hissed through clenched teeth, "you called the cops on your own community." "No, Rose," I said evenly loud enough for all to hear. "I called the cops on you." Gasps, someone muttered. "He has evidence." Another whispered, "Fraud. She forged documents." Two officers approached calm but firm. "Miss Gibson, we need to ask you some questions regarding property fraud and falsified records." Rose straightened her shoulders, flipping instantly into performance mode. "Officers, this is a misunderstanding. I'm the HOA president. This property belongs to the community. He's trying to bully me with his title." She jabbed a finger at me. "He's abusing his power as a judge." I almost laughed. "Funny accusation, Rose, considering you're the one who forged county records and defrauded lenders." I pulled another document from my binder and handed it to the lead officer. "This is a certified copy of the actual deed with my name verified by the county recorder." And here I flipped to the next page. Our notarized witness statements, vendor contracts signed under false pretenses, and a record of the fraudulent loan Miss Gibson secured using this mansion as collateral. The officer scanned the papers, jaw tightening. He turned to Rose. "Ma'am, this looks serious." Rose's mask cracked. She raised her voice shrill and desperate. "Don't you see? He's manipulating all of you. This mansion was always meant to be mine. The HOA deserves it. I deserve it." Her scream silenced the lawn. Even the children playing by the bounce house stopped and stared. Neighbors recoiled. Some shook their heads in disgust. Mrs. Alvarez crossed her arms and said loudly, "You lied to us, Rose." Another neighbor added, "You made us believe he was stealing, but you're the thief." The spell was broken. The investors, those same slick men who had eyed my library like a boardroom, slipped out quickly, avoiding eye contact. They knew fraud when they smelled it, and no one wanted their name attached to Rose's sinking ship. The officers stepped forward. "Miss Gibson, you're under arrest for fraud, attempted property theft, and falsifying official documents." When they pulled the cuffs from their belts, Rose lost whatever composure she had left. She thrashed, shouting, "This isn't over. You'll all regret this, Isaac Hayes. You'll regret the day you crossed me." Her voice cracked into something between a wail and a growl as they clicked the cuffs around her wrists. The crowd parted as she was escorted toward the cruiser, her heels scraping against the pavement. Some neighbors filmed on their phones, others whispered prayers of thanks. Tom, the gruff Vietnam vet, muttered, "Should have seen this coming years ago." As Rose was guided into the back seat, I walked closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "You wanted a courtroom, Rose. Now you'll get one. But I won't be sitting on the bench. You'll be standing in front of it." Her eyes burned with fury, but behind the rage I saw something else: panic. She knew this wasn't just embarrassment. This was prison time. The cruiser door slammed shut. Sirens wailed again, fading as the car pulled away. The HOA president, the self-appointed queen of Willow Creek, was gone. The crowd stood in stunned silence until Mrs. Alvarez clapped once. Slowly others joined in, not applause for Rose, but for her downfall. I turned back to the mansion, taking in the banners, the trampled lawn, the leftover champagne glasses still littering my porch. A mess, yes, but mine. Neighbors trickled over sheepish. Mr. Larkin, the same man who once told me to hand the house over, shuffled his feet. "Sorry, Judge Hayes. Guess we got carried away with her promises." I raised an eyebrow. "Promises built on lies tend to crumble fast, Mr. Larkin." He nodded, red-faced. By dusk, the lawn was empty again. The balloons had popped, the banners were torn down, and silence returned to Willow Creek Mansion. I stood on the porch binder still in hand and let the weight of it settle. Rose Gibson's empire of lies had collapsed in a single afternoon, and the irony, she orchestrated her own downfall. I just provided the audience. That night, as I poured a glass of wine, I couldn't help but chuckle. She had thrown a wedding, a gala, and a grand opening. In the end, the only thing she really opened was a criminal record. When Rose Gibson's cruiser disappeared down Willow Creek Drive, the neighborhood let out a collective sigh as though a storm had finally passed. People lingered in small clusters on the lawn, whispering, shaking their heads, avoiding my eyes. It wasn't shame exactly, it was the awkward realization that they'd been duped, swept up in Rose's spell like extras in a play. I didn't gloat. Oh, I could have. Every sarcastic line in my head begged to be spoken, still think it's community property, or want me to notarize your regret. But sometimes silence does more damage than words. I simply walked back up my steps, binder in hand, as though closing arguments had been delivered and the jury dismissed. That evening I wandered the mansion. Each room bore the scars of Rose's charade. The dining hall still smelled faintly of spilled champagne. My library rug bore muddy footprints from her investor tours. The fountain outside was clogged with rose petals and confetti. It was a mess, yes, but a reclaimable one. I stood in the library, running my hand along the oak shelves. For weeks, this place had been a stage set for someone else's fantasy. Now it was mine again. The silence felt heavier, richer, like the house itself was exhaling after holding its breath. Neighbors trickled by in the days that followed. Some came with casseroles. Others came with apologies. Mrs. Alvarez brought a lemon pie and muttered, "We should have trusted you, Judge Hayes." Rose was persuasive. That was a polite word for what she was. Mr. Larkin stopped by too, sheepishly returning the lawnmower he'd borrowed 3 months ago. "Guess you were right all along," he muttered, not quite meeting my gaze. I accepted their gestures with polite nods, though part of me knew it wasn't about forgiveness. It was about precedent. Rose had taught them a hard lesson: never confuse charisma for truth or a clipboard for authority. Meanwhile, the HOA scrambled like ants after their hill had been kicked. With Rose gone, meetings dissolved into chaos. Some members resigned, outright embarrassed by their complicity. Others tried to distance themselves, claiming they'd always had doubts. A few diehards still clung to the fantasy, but without their queen they were little more than whispers on the wind. I stayed away. Let them eat their own minutes. I had my mansion back, my peace, and more importantly, the law firmly on my side. But the real resolution came 2 weeks later when I received word from the county courthouse. Rose's case wasn't just moving forward, it was moving fast. Fraud, forgery, attempted property theft, wire fraud from that ridiculous loan she'd secured. Her list of charges read longer than most HOA bylaws. I sat at my desk, letter in hand, and allowed myself a smile. Justice wasn't just served. It was plated, garnished, and delivered with a bow. The neighborhood slowly settled back into normalcy. Kids played on bikes without shouting, "That's not your house." Neighbors waved again, albeit sheepishly. And my lawn, once trampled by strangers, grew lush and green under my care, no longer strangled by Rose's decorations. One night, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mansion in gold, I thought about everything. About how a simple favor spiraled into an all-out war. About how envy can turn a neighbor into an enemy. About how arrogance blinds people to the simplest truth: paper lies crumble, but stone foundations endure. And I couldn't help but laugh. Rose Gibson had thrown a wedding in my mansion, declared herself the hostess, branded it with HOA, banners, lied to neighbors, conned investors, and tried to snatch the deed out from under me. And for all that effort, all she earned was a set of handcuffs and a front row seat in court. She wanted a community center. She got a criminal record. If there's a lesson in all of this, it's that envy is a poison, and entitlement is its twin. Together they make people believe they deserve what they haven't earned, that taking is the same as owning, that lies can outlast truth. Rose Gibson thought she could rewrite history with forged papers and flashy speeches. She thought appearances mattered more than reality, that applause could outweigh evidence. But in the end, she forgot the simplest rule of all: reality doesn't bend to fantasy. And the law doesn't bow to arrogance. For me, the mansion was never just stone and mortar. It was the symbol of a life built through work, sacrifice, and yes, battles fought fairly in courtrooms. Rose tried to turn it into her stage, her redemption, her empire. But you can't steal foundations laid with honesty. So to anyone watching this, guard what you've built. Protect your boundaries. And never underestimate how far envy can drive someone who feels entitled to your life. As for Rose, her story became a cautionary tale whispered at HOA meetings across town, And me, I sit on this porch with my glass of iced tea still, Judge Isaac Hayes, still the owner of Willow Creek Mansion. She thought she'd won a wedding. I won the verdict. If you've ever had to deal with a neighbor like Rose, share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe because, trust me, this isn't the last HOA drama you'll hear from me.